Well, thank you and welcome to our 8th, 9th, 10th future funding webinar. It's great to see a lot of people back here again. We've got, as you'll know as well, the recordings of this will go up onto Basecamp as well, so people can then catch up with that too. Couple of things just to note. The session is being recorded, so if you don't want to be recorded, then you can turn your camera off. If you do want to be recorded, obviously, then just keep your camera on. But bear in mind, it may feature on the Basecamp recording that we put up later on. Thank you, a big thank you to Arts Council England, who's supporting the Future Funding Programme. And this time, big thank you as well to our two speakers. We've got Liz Purchase from the Philanthropy Company and Colin Baird from the National Literacy Trust, who are joining us to talk about fundraising from trusts and foundations. So I'll kick off with Liz, if you could, I'll pop your presentation up, and then Liz Purchases, I'll let you introduce yourself and your role, and then you can start your presentation.
Great, thank you, Ian. Thanks for the introduction. Pleased to meet everybody out there. I'm going to have a look today at the fundraising trends and funding trends in the arts and culture sector at the moment. So I'm going to look at three key areas, just a kind of overview of what happened last year, to give a bit of context about the response to COVID-19 and how funders are now starting to regroup and move forward. And I'm going to have a look quickly at just some of the main statutory funders, what they're doing, as in the Arts Council and the Lottery Community Fund, and also a quick overview of trusts and foundations that support the cultural sector. And then finally, I'm just going to have a quick look at how consultants can help in the process of fundraising. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the Philanthropy Company. We're a group of consultants that all have specialities in various different fields. My background is in arts and heritage fundraising and the cultural sector. We've been around for over 18 years now. Last year, we worked with the National Emergencies Trust to support their fundraising for the coronavirus appeal and supported their team to raise over £90 million. We also worked with smaller organisations last year at grassroots level to help them through the pandemic and support them with writing applications and training for their team. For example, Westway Trust, London's Charity, to support communities that after the Westway flyover creation. So last year we were busy, and this year we're driving forward with lots of different client work, and not least in the arts and culture sector. Next slide, please. So just looking quickly at the public funders that were supporting the COVID response last year and how they adapted. The three key funders that were helping to keep things going were obviously the DCMS with the huge Cultural Recovery Fund, the government response, which was over £1.57 billion. That actually kind of saved so many different organisations from going under and facing the cliff edge. And it's also maintains a lot of kind of organisations to think about recovery and how they sustain for the future. So there's been a couple of different rounds over the last 12 months, and I think there's now a third round going forward. So the DCMS was a huge response, important response for funding. And then National Lottery, there are two funding streams, the Heritage Fund and the Communities Fund. So last year, they were able to support at grassroots level and with real kind of emergency response funding. And one of the National Lottery Heritage Fund COVID response streams included things like green recovery capacity building, which is kind of a reflection of the way quite a few funders are now starting to build their kind of recovery programs. Is thinking about environmental sustainability, and that for libraries could be things like looking at how your building actually responds to targets around the environment, that kind of thing. There was also the response from the Arts Council, and they responded by supporting the government to distribute some of the cultural recovery funds. There was also the repayable finance scheme that was available, and the way forward now is for them is with project grants, which I will come to in a bit. So the overview in a nutshell, last year it was really kind of encouraging to see that funders really quick to respond to the process and find different ways of adapting to help people. Next slide, please. So with trusts and foundations, which is a huge area of fundraising for the cultural sector, the key players last year, the big names like the Garfield Western Foundation, Esme Fairbairn Foundation, the Monument Trust, for example, they all found different ways of responding and new ways of working. So they adapted their previous giving priorities, and many offered flexibility on all elements of their relationships with their existing grantees. Some temporarily suspended funding, but you'll now see that they're starting to open up their grant funding programs again. Some created kind of an exceptional funding response to COVID, like Wolfson, who set up a £10 million COVID response fund. That was in a very short space of time. They normally give around 30 million. So as a proportion, that was a significant sort of flag in the ground to say we're here to support communities and people and our grantees through the crisis. A lot of them worked collaboratively last year. So you would have seen that, for example, the Wolfson Foundation, they partnered with Jerwood Arts, Esme Fairbairn and the Limbury Trust on new funding programmes like the Live Work Fund, supporting individual artists to help them through the crisis. For example, also the London Funders, who coordinated a funding statement on COVID-19, which was that we know civil society will also be crucial to the recovery and renewal of our communities beyond the crisis. And I think that kind of sort of encapsulates really the way that lots of funders responded, but are also now going forward. So you'll see that lots of criteria for, in terms of trust and foundation funders, is about how to support people and communities more than ever, and how to kind of recover beyond the pandemic, how to build back and build back better. Next slide, please. So what are the current funding opportunities now? The Arts Council have opened their project grants, and it's an ongoing round of funding. I think it's quite sort of key really to bear in mind that they are now in their sort of new current, their new 10-year strategy. So that's current, it's live. The 10-year strategy started last year. And it's called Let's Create. So it's all about co-creation with people. The three key things to bear in mind are creative people. Everyone can develop and express creativity throughout their life. Cultural communities, so villages, towns, cities will thrive through a collaborative approach to culture. And a creative and cultural country. So England's cultural sector is innovative, collaborative and international. And I think just wanted to bring that out because lots of funders will follow suit. You'll see that trusts and foundations will be looking to the Arts Council to how they kind of reorganise their funding programmes going forward. Next slide, please. So also current funding opportunities include the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and they are focused on their outcomes, which is really about boosting the local economy, providing job creation and encouraging skills development, supporting local health and well-being, and encouraging the rebuilding of community cohesion. You'll also see that in the National Lottery Community Fund. So I think those match the kind of and mirror some of the responses that the Arts Council are taking forward. Next slide, please. So I just picked out some of the key UK funders, the biggest ones who make up the lion's share of funding streams that are available to apply to. I've chosen a picture from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation website here, as they again are focused on transforming communities so that everybody has a chance to respond creatively. The Paul Hamlin Foundation have reopened their programmes. The Wolfson Foundation are now open for applications for 2 streams, which are places for people And the capital projects are live again. I know with libraries this may not be at the forefront, but if you are able to sort of consider making an application for a capital grant, which has a project woven into it, which is about supporting your communities, you would be eligible. The other stream, which is about individual grant giving for individuals for training and education, wouldn't be you know, appropriate for you. But the capital program, which is grants for places, would be something that you could consider. Next slide, please. So I've just I thought I'd just put in an example here of where one of the UK's largest funders has supported a community project, and that's the Garfield Weston Foundation, who this year awarded £30,000 to Fairvale Community Hub in Sheffield. And I thought it was a good example to show you, because it kind of demonstrates the kind of projects that Garfield Weston are now looking to support. And being one of the larger funders, smaller trusts and foundations will kind of look to Garfield Weston to see what they're doing. So they awarded £30,000, as I said, as a grant for 12 months. Fairvale Community Hub provide advocacy and support services for their local community. It's not a library as such, obviously, but there are aspects of the Community Hub that I thought would kind of mirror some of the things that libraries are now doing, such as giving support around budgeting, disability living allowance, income support, that kind of thing. They also offer courses on ESOL and employability. They help with immigration service applications, digital. They have a digital media centre, so they help local people to use digital in terms of how they build their businesses, school children, that kind of thing. And they're also very much focused on cohesion through projects. Community cohesion through projects. So that's something that the Garfield Weston have really kind of looked to support and invest in. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up, thinking about what consultants do. So as I mentioned, the philanthropy company, I can't even say my own company name, that we support lots of clients across the board, from small charities to large organisations and institutions. That ranges from working, for example, with the British Library on their capital project to smaller charities at grassroots level. And what we do is kind of tailored support. So we really get stuck in and hands-on. So it can be anything from trustee training, supporting your staff so that they can become fundraisers themselves. So we can kind of work in-house with you to actually build and tailor a program. We also do writing of cases for support, helping you to hone your messaging and write applications, that kind of thing. And also nitty-gritty things like prospect research. So we can help clients to actually assess the marketplace and find what prospects for fundraising are out there. So that's us in a nutshell, the philanthropy company, and just handing back to you, Ian, if there's any questions, happy to answer them.
Fantastic, thank you, Liz. And really interesting, I think, just to see that shift in terms of the individual funders shift towards that localism agenda as well, which I know that Colin's going to be talking a bit later on about across the wider spectrum as well. So that's brilliant to see how that ties together. And yeah, in terms of consultants, I think in some senses, I know in a lot of the charity world, there's kind of a bit of a sense that charities should have their own fundraising department and things like that, but libraries don't. And the idea of being able to bring in additional expertise, especially when opportunities are often very time limited and there's a lot of pressure, and basically the library services are in positions where there's a limited amount of strategic and bid writing capacity within them, because there's so much else going on, especially as we're in the process of reopening, reshaping and refiguring ourselves to whatever any kind of new sense of normality turns out to be. So thank you, Liz. Does anyone have any questions for Liz? We will have questions later on for everyone as well, but if anyone's got any questions for Liz, that we pop something in the chat or put a hand up. Aha, Russell Barrow from Hempstead, or from Hertfordshire. Are these foundations willing to fund services like libraries that are local authority funded?
There are funders that support projects within, that will support a project within a library that has, that's in receipt of local authority funding. I'd say in the main trusts and foundations don't do what they call replacement funding. So if they see it as a kind of an existing statutory service, then you probably wouldn't be eligible, but they do look at projects within a statutory funded organisation, like a local library, that would fit their criteria. So some of those funders that I've mentioned, like the Esme Fairbairn Foundation or Garfield Weston, for example, they will certainly look at an application from you if it meets their criteria about supporting local communities.
Brilliant, thank you, Liz. Does anyone else have any questions? Or we can move on to the next bits. So Liz, I'm conscious you're around till about 1:45, aren't you?
Yes.
So if there are any other questions for Liz, then do pop them through the chat and we'll make sure that we get the chance to ask Liz before she leaves as well. So I'm just going to share the next presentation. So what I'm going to be talking about is essentially where this fits in terms of the income strategy for. Is that sharing now? Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. So where this fits in terms of what we're trying to achieve with future funding. So future funding is about sustainable funding for library services, and that includes all sorts of things in terms of trusts and foundations, in terms of individual giving, in terms of commercial opportunities and trading and things like that. So how do we fit it with that? Because one of the big challenges with project funding like this from trusts and foundations is that it's time limited as well. So when we're looking at it, the common way is to kind of have a pipeline about like this. So we're looking through Q1 2021 all the way to 2023. And we've got, for example, a digital inclusion project from ACE, an employment support project from the Hamlin Foundation. And then we've got some potential things that we might be able to do and apply for in 2023. But what happens at that point? What happens at that point if we're not successful with those? Oh, is it on slide? Oh, sorry. Is that showing the correct slide?
I think maybe you've got two screens, have you? We're seeing the slide sorted down the left and it's on the balance and risk slide.
Oh, I'm just going to stop share and reshare it.
Yeah.
Just as. Is that better? Should say thinking long term.
Yes, that's better.
Yeah, so you'd have a pipeline of projects like this where you'd be lining them up and trying to make sure that you've got ongoing funding and ongoing income and projects, which have then got that kind of project, that trust and foundation funding alongside it. But then, yeah, what happens in 2023 if we're not successful with any of those? If we're not successful with any continuation for the digital inclusion project in blue, not successful with any of the employment support, or if it reduces, how does that impact, first of all, the staff that are working on that first, and then the people who are relying on those projects, but then also how does it impact the contribution to your core costs as libraries that those projects will be providing? Because what we're really conscious of is that as we start to bring in additional sources of funding and they start contributing to our core costs and we build up our core and infrastructure costs that way as well, often local authorities might see that as an opportunity to reduce that part of their funding for your infrastructure. And when those projects finish, that's not going to come back. And so you'll need to find different ways to fund it. So it's a bit like kind of a ratchet where it's sort of like a one-way road where if we're going down this way, we need to know that we can do it sustainably because we kind of almost can't take a step back on that as well. So looking back on one of the things in terms of balancing risk that we looked at, I think in the second webinar of this series, we were looking at splitting things out and trying to have things in all of these 4 quadrants. And you might want to label these quadrants differently or have additional quadrants, but essentially kind of looking at income from trusts and grants, income from commission services, income from trading, which could be either selling space or room hire and things like that, or it could be actually selling services or tangible things as well. And then fundraised income, which could be things which is sort of individual fundraising. So things like where you've got, you're doing bake sales, or you've got people going out to do challenge events, that kind of thing. But looking specifically at the trusts and grants and commission services, what we could start thinking of is trusts and grants as being a training ground for commission services. So we're starting to look at trusts and foundations as a way to start to pilot services as well. And if we kind of hold that thought while we start looking at this other way of viewing it through this dual bottom line, where we're looking at every kind of service we're providing in terms of, on the left, whether it's providing a high level of social impact, and sort of from left to right, whether it's providing a high level of income or surplus. So the bit in the bottom left-hand corner, not much social impact and not much income, we shouldn't be doing it. The bit on the bottom right, not much social impact and not much maybe alignment with our mission as libraries. It's probably quite a lot of income. It's probably worth doing as long as the subsidy from that subsidizes something else that is aligned with our mission. But then looking at the stuff on top where it's high levels of social impact and high levels of alignment with the library's mission and core services, if there's not much income from it, then it might need subsidy, but it's something that we really want to be doing. And then the perfect projects are the ones that provide big alignment with the mission and high levels of social impact and a lot of income at the same time as well. So the way we, again, look at trusts and foundations in supporting this is that we start off with things that we know will have a high level of social impact, but don't at that time provide much of an income. Use the trusts and foundations to provide that income, but use that time to generate a service that does provide income, but meets the same levels, the same social impact. So what we've then put together is a bit of a commercial development approach, where the blue is the charitable funding. So you identify a need, develop a proposal, have a funding application. When you're successful, deliver that service as a pilot service. But then alongside that, you'd start looking at commercial income, start looking at optimizing the model, trying to get it more efficient, make it commission ready, but at the same time also evaluate impact and value for that, and then go into sort of sales and bidding so that you end up with a commission service at the end where you're getting commercial income from it. So looking at not necessarily seeing for a specific area or a specific service, not necessarily seeing trust and foundation funding as the long-term or the permanent approach, but actually kind of investment or seed funding to get you to a level where it can be a commissioned service. That then frees up that source of charitable funding, that trust, to then go back to for potentially another service that you're trying to develop or another opportunity. That won't be suitable for all services. A lot of services might end up being just either time limited and there's no scope or need to continue them, whether as a trust funded service or as a commercial service. But I think a lot of the opportunities around at the moment, particularly in addressing some of the really kind of deep ingrained need within society in terms of deprivation and inequalities and things like that, is stuff that charitable funding will be a really good source of trying to tap to try and get a service up and running for that. But then once you can demonstrate the impact of it, you can then start looking to local authorities, to LEPs, the local enterprise partnerships, to health bodies and education bodies to actually say, if we provide this service on a commercial basis to you, it will have this impact, and start shifting it into a more sort of commercial framework there as well. So essentially that's kind of where, and this isn't rocket science, this is what a lot of third sector organizations are doing already. I suspect this is probably what Colin's service development pipeline will look like. It's just framing it in a way that hopefully makes sense to the library services as well. So that whole thing of essentially taking ideas, using trusts and foundations as a way to find out what works and demonstrate the impact of it, critically actually getting the evaluation out of it to then be able to to demonstrate that it's something that will make a tangible impact to any other, well, to any funder, I suppose, so that potentially a commercial funder, but potentially a local authority or statutory funder who would be doing it on a commercial basis. So does anyone have any questions around that? Have anything in there? Right. So Rosie's asked a question, an example of a project moving from top left to top right in the graph. And I think that's the dual bottom line graph where it was moving from high social impact and low income to high social impact and high income. And I think an example of that might be something where you're providing a service. In fact, a good example of it would be an organisation I used to work at. We provided a service which was short breaks for young adopted people who were not generally able to, because of behavioural issues and things like that, and the additional needs that they might have, were not able to join school trips or group sort of young people kind of doing sort of weekends away, and the, is it PGL sort of school sort of organised structured school events. And we had a service that really didn't bring much income, but was incredibly valuable to the young people who accessed it, which was sort of short breaks, which was supported with a therapeutic framework around them, with trained workers and things. But at the level we were providing it's just about broke even. We managed to get input from funding from the DFE, where we actually made it a national programme and basically increased the scale of it tenfold. So we were then in a position to start to benefit from economies of scale. And so we ended up with a service that was providing the same level of service, but the administration and organisation around it, the cost of that reduced significantly. And so we ended up with a service that was actually starting to provide the same level of impact, but provide a much bigger level of income as well to the organisation. So I think an example of, that shifting from low level of income to high level of income, but maintaining the same social impact, is essentially an example of a service that's scaling up. Fits that quite well, I think. Any other questions, or any questions for Liz? Because I'm just conscious that Liz might have to vanish through the next presentation. No? In that case, can I introduce Colin Baird from National Literacy Trust?
Hi, folks. Hi there. Let me, first of all, just make sure I can share my presentation. Everyone seen the change in slides?
Yes.
Great. So my name is Colin Baird. I'm the head of trusts and statutory fundraising at the National Literacy Trust. My presentation starts with a picture of my dog, just because often when I'm talking on Zoom, my dog thinks that someone's come into the house, and she comes across and does her nosy, and when she walks across the floor, it sounds like she's tap dancing. So just in case you think that anyone in the house is tap dancing as I'm speaking, it's just my dog walking across the floor. So what I'm going to go through today for you is just that pre-stage that Ian's talking about. And the National Literacy Trust, Ian, we very much work in that commercial development approach with a charity that has no real core income from anywhere. So we have to knit together lots of projects and working through cost recovery to support our infrastructure. What I thought would be useful today, I'm very aware that I'm very aware that librarians have enough going on and don't have the capacity to be fundraisers. And so what I thought it might be good today to do is to really look at that kind of pre-commercial point and just looking at small asks and putting together a small ask and just those basics. And really working to a strength that you may not know that you've got. So I think just to give you an introduction to trust and foundations landscape. So as you can see here, there's around 10,000 trusts and foundations distributing about 3 billion annually across the UK. I may as well get the bad news out the way. The fact is that probably only about 0.1 to 1% of those trusts and foundations will want to fund you. So that is, will even consider funding you. So that's between 10 and 100, and even less will want to fund you. The good news is that we're all in the exact same boat, and we all have different strengths and weaknesses when it comes to trusts and foundations. And different trusts and foundations fund many different things. And going back to, I think there was a question in the chat just about being a statutory organisation, or being statutory funded, that is. I think the answer to that is the same as hospitals. Look, no hospital wants to fund or have to find funding for cancer scanning equipment or neurological scanning equipment, but here we are. And I think that that's the way that you have to look at library services too. There's a need there, and there's absolutely an identifiable need there. And the fact is that it's not being funded, and therefore we need to find funding. And what I thought would be good today is to look at the ask and look around local trusts and foundations, because I think that that's where you cut your teeth. It's certainly where I did, and perhaps that's where Liz did as well, doing small asks to local trusts and foundations that you can really get to know. So it's not really just about making these really large 10-page, 15-page application forms, but actually it's a 2-page introduction to you, what you do. There may be a good chance that that funder has actually walked through your doors and actually knows your service. So it's really about that beginning conversation. So I think for libraries, there's probably 3 types of asks as you get started. So you have the first one, we're the only local library in town. Our funding gets cut every year. To be honest, we just want to survive. That's your core funding ask. Then you have your library and the space that you have, and actually making that space more appealing to library users. So your capital and equipment funding. And then you have your project funding, which is really about creating projects to increase perhaps library membership, get more people through your doors, or to hold different groups and classes. Sorry, I'm trying to look at 2 things at once here. So when you're first making your ask, and again, forgive me, this might be things that lots of people already know. Your project title, so make it interesting. Your summary box, why you, and the introduction, who you are. What I would say is, when it comes to the localism agenda, is that the aspects of community development are really important in your small ask and your introduction. You have to make it clear that you are very important to community development, both in terms of cultural development, which is, I think, lots of what Liz does, economic, why libraries are important to, for example, developing a reading habit, and how that is important to every aspect of your life, but also the social aspect of community development, and those kind of less tangible asks, or less tangible reasons why people come into your library, and how you actually show that when it comes to funding applications, because it's very difficult. And I think to do all of that, really the need, and identifying the need and who your beneficiaries are. And going back to localism, it really is the strength that libraries have, that lots of other organisations don't have. You have people that come through your door every single day, and it's really about getting to know those beneficiaries, or as you call them, library users. And it's really about identifying who they are, why they come into the library, what do they use the library for, what are the different needs that they have, and actually the conversation that you have with your library users. And I think that the last point here about establishing need. It is probably the most important thing for you, and probably something that I would say lots of libraries should probably work on if they're going to make trusts and foundations asks. Often, and I have to say my charity is extremely guilty of this, we spend far too much time reading reports, and we spend far too much time looking at the indices of multiple deprivation to really identify who our beneficiaries are. And really, we need to be talking to people, and we need to be building relationships with people that we work with. There's a huge conversation in our charity at the moment about what we term people, the collective group of people that we work with. Are they participants? Are they beneficiaries? Are they service users? And that's really important, because when it comes to small local trusts and foundations, they really want you to know who you're working with. They really want to know that the words that you're putting into an ask are actually the words from the people that you're working with. And that is really important. And I wouldn't say it's very different from the large organisations such as Garfield Weston, Paul Hamlin, etc. But lots of those large, big asks are really about systems change. So it's very much about working locally and something that's scalable, that can really have national impact. What I'm talking about today in the localism agenda is actually those small asks in those organisations that are locally, that know that, just like a library, they're a resource, and they're a resource that they know that they may have to keep refunding you, because there just is no other money locally to keep your service going. And I think that that's really important to remember. There are lots of trusts and foundations out there that only want to fund you once, and they don't want to fund you again. But equally, there's lots of local trusts and foundations out there that you could go on a list. They tend to refresh every 3 to 5 years, which could be between £1,000 and £5,000 a year. And that's guaranteed funding for a minimum of 3 years. And I don't have to tell you how important £1,000 is, as well as 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. And that's why I would encourage people, going back to the different types of ask, whether it be core, whether it be capital and equipment, or whether it be project funding. I think the main thing to do is really to start writing and really put together an ask over 2 pages, because that's all you need for an introduction. You don't have to write anything significant. All you need to do is have the main points within an ask. So that covers need in your library users. Then comes outcomes. So who will benefit? So is there a specific demographic within your libraries that you want to work with, or within your local community? Our charity, as with all organisations, there's a huge conversation about equality, diversity, inclusion. And so we really look at and really break down at a ward level and a community level about the groups that we work with and who we're supporting. I would encourage everyone to do that. How many will benefit? One thing to remember is that grant managers only have a very short period of time to look at your ask. And one of the first things that they'll do is a very crude calculation, and they'll look at the total amount that you're asking and how much per head that's going to be for. So you really have to look at a realistic number of people that you're going to benefit, and break that down in terms of light touch or more intensive work. In describing hard and soft outcomes, hard outcomes are very easy. You may be asking for supply for 20 books, for 50 books, it may be for magazines, but soft outcomes are more challenging, they're less tangible. But again, I think that that's a library strength, because you can talk to people who come in and use your service, who use your buildings, and striking up a conversation with your library users, whether it be creating small youth groups, consultation groups, anything like that. I think I would really encourage you to do that, because that is absolutely your strength. Obviously, there's things like project management, how you run your project, the phases of work, timescales, and who will do the work. And I think one of the things to remember is that I wouldn't create a project just simply to get money in, because you're going to have to put that money out again if it's far past your capacity. And it's a mistake that lots of trust and lots of first-time applicants to trust and foundations do. They create a £5,000 ask and realise it doesn't cover anything that they have to cover covering their daily services because they haven't built in cost recovery. Evaluation budget, so how you record your success and prove what your project did, what it said it was going to do. Again, back to localism. In your library users, you can a very, very simple survey on your library, the importance of your library, and the importance of the project that you asked it for funding is really easy to do, and it doesn't cost any money. And surveys, then turning them into case studies, are so important for small local trusts and foundations. And again, always remember to cost your budget properly. Always remember to put in cost recovery, no more than 12%, unless you're looking for, unless you're making an ask for your core services. Do not put in cost recovery because it's double funding. Oh yeah, and each budget line in an ask should have a budget explanation, no more than 10 words usually. And then finally, a thank you. And again, it's back to building that relationship with trusts and foundations. Always invite funders, regional funders to your library, whether it is to see a project in motion or whether it's for them just to come and visit your library. My experience is that regional funders love to come on visits. And actually, it's really the time where they make that decision. So absolutely encourage people to come and visit. I've got a couple of cheat sheets, and after this one, there's also one about striking up a conversation with a trust and foundation on the telephone if you don't want to write. But it comes back to that same thing, that same important aspect of trust and foundations applications, which is striking up a relationship with a regional funder. So just basics in trust and foundation funding: use plain English, avoid jargon, acronyms and abbreviations. As Tori knows about being at the National Literacy Trust, we love an abbreviation. I've been there for 4 years and I still don't know what half the programs teams are talking about. Don't waffle. Use short words, sentences and paragraphs. Break up text and headings, bullet points. Trusts and foundations love white space. Sometimes I think some grant managers prefer white space to some of the things that I've written. Use active language, and I think this is really important. Write what we plan to do, not what you hope to do. You're a working service in a local community. It is really important to show that your whole ethos is about growing within the local community and having real impact within the local community. And tell a story. And I think that that's absolutely up for libraries. It really is about the story that you're telling when you're creating a 2-page introduction to yourselves to local trusts and foundations. You really have to tell the story. And using case studies from your surveys or people that you're working with, your library users, to get a statement from a library user to say how important your library is to the local community. It's so powerful. It really is. And include a picture. I have to say that this is just something that we kind of get taught at Trust and Foundation School. A lot of the time I don't include a picture. I don't think it's a necessity, but as part of your case study, you absolutely should. Quick recap. So really it's about that introduction, about the project, the need. So again, think about the local community. This is really about your library users, not about what you provide. Your library users, their needs, how you've established their needs. So it's really about talking to your library users. Outcomes of your project, who will benefit, how many, your hard and soft outcomes, how you run it. So main phases, timescales, who will do the work, monitoring and evaluation, budget, and the ask and a thank you. And obviously offer people to come and meet you so that you can build that relationship even more. Big mistakes that often happens, didn't follow the guidelines, didn't meet criteria, didn't meet local requirements, and assumed the funder knew all about them, which is a mistake that we've certainly made in the past. Lacked required documentation, so often you have to send accounts, whether it be one-pager management accounts or something more substantial. Didn't use the application form, didn't answer the questions simply and directly, and provided too much information. And I think that's why it's important just to limit your ask down to 2 pages, particularly with regional funders. They will get in excess of 500 asks per funding round, and they scan very quickly your application. As I say, I have a more detailed cheat sheet, which I'm happy to provide to Ian and Tori, which you can send around to people. This is very, very abridged version. So the main thing that I assume that everybody wants to know is, how do you find the trust that will fund you? And again, here we're just looking at local trusts and foundations, and looking at certainly that kind of 1,000 to 5,000 pounds to really cut your teeth in honing your message, talking about the people that you are supporting to get a grant. The first thing I always do is Google charitable trusts that fund libraries. It is really that simple, and it's free, and you will be surprised by the number of charitable trusts and foundations that will come up. The second thing, Google charitable trusts in the area. So Google charitable trusts in Midlands. We have, I don't know if Liz does, but we subscribe to Funds Online, which is this database of trusts and foundations. And it's great, but there's nothing like a good Google to find trusts and foundations. So much information is put online now. I don't know if many people know about this, but once you've done your Googling, you can then look at the Register of Charities from the Charities Commission. This is fantastic because every single charity has to list their annual accounts, and you can actually look on this portal and download their most recent accounts, and you can actually see who they funded. You can see what they funded and who they funded, and it gives you a guide as to whether you should ask for £5,000. If you see if you see the accounts page who we funded, and you see over a number of years that they funded the same charity, the exact same amount, this is one of these golden charities that usually fund local organisations and will constantly fund it, say, to £3,000, £5,000 every single year for 3 years. And striking up a relationship with those trusts and foundations is really, really important. As I said, the Institute of Fundraising trusts online and their books. It is worthwhile if you know any large organisations and ask if they're willing to donate their old version of Trust's database. It's something that we do. So when we buy a brand new book, when it's updated, they're usually updated every 2 years. If anyone asks us for our old book, we absolutely give it to them, and we do it every single time. And we, as well as the online portal, we also buy many of the books. So it's absolutely worth asking larger charities like the National Literacy Trust if we'd be willing to donate that book. Local authorities. So one of the things that I've noticed, and your local authority might not share it with you because they're so used to speaking directly to third sector organisations, I've noticed a growing amount of local authorities creating lists of local funders. And it's absolutely worth checking whoever deals in your local authority with that, because they may have done it, or one of the related agencies to the local authorities or a partner may have done it, but they've just not shared that information. So it's definitely worth checking. National Lottery Awards for All. I think if you are an independent trust, but you get your money from the local authority, which I imagine lots of libraries are the same as lots of leisure services now, that's kind of how they work. you should be able to apply for Awards for All. Awards for All is up to £10,000. It's a local fund. And in lots of organisations that I've worked for, it's kind of the easy win. And so it's absolutely worth looking. They may have changed criteria since I last applied. I have to say it's been a long time, but it's absolutely worth looking at National Lottery Awards for All. It's a fund that's also distributed by the local regional office, so it's not centralised. And it's absolutely worth striking up a relationship with the local National Lottery officer. There's also a few community websites and a few community networking organisations. So mycommunity.org lists local trusts and foundations, and Community Foundations is the network organisation. So getting started when you're writing your ask. I thought it was important to bring my favourite book here today, and a book that I would absolutely encourage you to stock. And it's a New York Times bestseller called Steal Like an Artist. And essentially the book is all about how creatives borrow from other creatives in the past. And obviously I would never encourage anyone to plagiarise. I say that I've just finished a university course. I would absolutely look at what other people write, whether it be on blogs, whether it be in other books. I think it's really important to hone your language, particularly if you are looking to create a heritage ask. It's really important to look and see the language that funders are using, but also what other network groups and how they're writing. That's what we do. I mean, we spend lots of time honing our message, obviously running it through the comms team, but we really look at how funders are writing, their style of writing, what language they use, whether they use beneficiaries, users, participants, and what their focus is. And just following on from that, I think this is a really good book, generally for everyone to read. You might not agree with lots of things that Darren talks about. Darren's a Glasgow writer and an MC, rapper. He raps in Glaswegian, which is fantastic. But Poverty Safari it's a stunning book, I have to say. But there are two sections in it which would absolutely be worth you reading, because again, it's really about language. And towards the end, there's a fantastic chapter all about libraries and about the importance of libraries in communities. And there's also, I think at the beginning, he talks about reading and developing a reading habit and how that's been important for him. So I would encourage just as a book to read, but also language. It's absolutely worth clearly not plagiarizing from, but just looking at that style of language. And then two other books I think it's worth looking at is Trust Fundraising, which I think might now be a free PDF. Might be worth checking that out, Ian or Tori. I think from DSC it might be free now. Anyone can look at it. You literally just, it's online. Maybe worth looking at that and sending around to people. That's got some really good process things in it, especially if you're starting out. And this second one, Writing Better Funding Applications, it's an oldie, but it's a goodie. And it really does give good examples towards the end of the book about writing two-pagers, introductions to trusts and foundations, and it's very much local, I suppose, locally geared towards local writing to local trusts and foundations. So that's my whistle-stop tour of writing an application. I hope that didn't add to anyone's stress about having to add fundraising to your already busy days. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Colin, and Lola for her support as well. That was brilliant. I've just had a quick check, and the Trust Fundraising book it's out of print, but there's a PDF download for £17 on the DSC website. I put the thing in there. The other thing I'd mention, and this is something that's started since I've not been involved directly in fundraising, so I'm not sure of how much use it is, but hopefully it will be, is 360 Giving, which has got a grant navigator, which essentially is open data. So it's got, if you search for libraries on there, there's 3,400 responses, and it's basically a database of trusts that have, well, a database of grants that have been made through trusts and foundations. And if there seems to be a huge number of library grants on there as well, which is brilliant. So, and again, something that could just be lifted and copied and learned from.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Trace, because actually one of my colleagues looks after it. Charity Excellence, which is run by a guy called Ian. I can't remember his second name, but you find him on LinkedIn. He is he's created this free open access platform, which I'm pretty sure references libraries as one of the search engines in it. And yeah, 360, yeah, as well. Those are really good ones, actually.
Brilliant. Well, fantastic. Thank you, Colin. That was absolutely brilliant, and really, really practical as well. I think that's definitely giving people something that they can just pick up and start using as well, which is even better. Liz, I'm afraid, has had to leave now. So we do have one question for Liz, but I wonder whether, Colin, you might be able to help answering this. Has Rosie from Libraries Unlimited has asked, have you noticed any trends in the type of outcomes funders are looking for?
No, because there are so many trusts and foundations, each with their own criteria. I would say, you know, the biggest trends, as I say, are localism and supporting local smaller organisations. And I think I'd say that the only trend in outcomes is providing an invaluable service, whatever that may be. The outcomes have to be related to the project that you're applying for, and you have to be honest that you know that you're applying for a project that you really want to do.
Yeah, brilliant. And then Russell.
Ian McIntosh. Thank you for whoever that was.
So Russell again from Hertfordshire. How do we evidence back to the funder that these soft outcomes have been met?
I think that the best way, and I'm particularly talking about local charities, is case studies. I think that's the easiest way for soft outcomes. The other way to do it is, you know, if it's a project related to school groups, and it's about learning and, you know, being in an environment, a library environment that promotes learning. You could get statements from a teacher to say that that's improved health and well-being, coming to the library instead of sitting in the classroom, because so many schools don't have libraries. Yeah, a case study is the best way to illustrate your soft skills.
Are the two things there as well, I suppose, because there's the case studies to demonstrate impact of funded projects, I suppose. Would it be helpful for I suppose us as a central organisation, and for everyone who's part of this this discussion as well, to start sharing some of the case studies that they've got? Because then if we've got a strong case study for something that works in Sheffield, then actually in Manchester, that could be really useful to set up a similar project or a similar service there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Right. Another question. Any tips on, this is Rosie again from Libraries Unlimited, who I have to say is our champion questioner today. Any tips on making your core ask when libraries do so much, and saying that relates to your website in person? So essentially, if you're making I think this is what Rosie's saying. Rosie, are you able to?
I am here.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, I guess, no, you have got it, Ian. Libraries do so much. How do you get that in a nutshell when you are putting your general ask out there, if it's not for a project or?
Yeah, and it's the universal challenge that we all have when it comes to core income, just to, you know, your daily running costs. I was going back to, I think in one of my first or second slides, you basically just have to work through it and refine down into a very short paragraph what you do. I think for libraries, I think it's the importance of community development that would speak to a lot of trusts and foundations, unless you were specifically, it was a reading in book ask or a specific health and well-being ask. But I think, again, if you can articulate the importance of what you do, the collective of what you do, in a really digestible way, I think that's the only thing you really can do. And I would absolutely look at the, and I only really thought about it last night, but I would absolutely try to break it down into the cultural, economic, and social context importance of libraries. But yeah, we have the same problem, and we actually just constantly refine our message and refine what we do. A good place to start might be if any, I'm not sure what happens with libraries, whether you have written strategies, but whether your libraries or maybe libraries connected mission statement, but actually start with your mission statement and your strategic objectives. And perhaps that's a good way to try and refine down what you do. But what I would say is your focus should not be on what you do. Your focus should be on the need of the community, and you're the mechanism to meet that need. So I think that's a different way to look at it. Really focus on what would be missing in your community, or what is missing in the community, and only your library can actually meet that need. That's the best way, I think, for a core ask. And also, it's okay to say that you're statutory funded, you're funded by a local authority. Everyone appreciates that because of COVID, that there are going to be winners and losers in the funding rounds over the next few years. And everyone knows that libraries is a strong contender for loss, unfortunately. So I think it's absolutely okay to say that. And I think it's okay to write that in an ask, especially to a local funder. I think I would say is that one of the things that we've found, and I think probably over the last 3 years, local funders more and more are being staffed by grant managers who know their local community. And I mean really know their local community. It's in Bedfordshire, there's a trust called the Harper Trust. And they have huge amounts of money. So if you're a library in Luton or Bedfordshire, pay attention. I was in a meeting with them probably about 3 weeks ago, and the knowledge that they know about their community is huge. So if you're going to go to a regional funder, they probably know lots of the issues in the community, and they know that you're probably a service that's needed, and actually it's refunding that's probably needed. So the argument of having to write everything that you do is probably not needed. The idea that a library is needed and the benefits of a library is probably enough. Sorry, that was a bit of a ramble.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was brilliant. And actually reinforcing those two things that basically sort of like, it is, the funders know their communities and they'll understand it. And that thing about focusing on us as enablers to meet need as well. I think the other thing, just in terms of being open about the funding challenge, is that pre-COVID, libraries had gone through 10 years where their funding had decreased by 30 or 40%. And I think funders will be aware of that and will understand that as the context as well.
Yeah, Liz was absolutely right. Trusts and foundations do not want to be a replacement of statutory funding. That's a fact, especially your large Garfield Westons, Paul Hamlin foundations, etc. The smaller trusts and foundations think the exact same, but they're more realistic about what's happening in their local community, and sometimes they do have to step in even if they don't want to. Because of, not because they don't want to, but because statutory funding has been taken away.
Brilliant, thank you. Any more questions for Colin while he's here?
Can I just say, see that £17 PDF? I think it's worth doing more searches for it, because I'm sure I didn't pay. I'm sure I just found it online.
I couldn't possibly suggest that, but I'll have a look.
Might be in the reference section of your library.
Yeah, actually, yeah. And one key thing that Rosie's highlighted as well is that if you've got a BIPC in your area, you've probably, so a business and IP centre within the libraries, you've probably got access to some funding databases through that. Some of it might be sources of SME funding, but some of it might include fundraising databases as well. Any more questions for Colin, or for me, or for anyone?
Great to chat to Colin further. My role is fundraising, but Libraries Unlimited is operates a bit differently to some other library services. But yeah, thank you. It's refreshing to speak to somebody who gets it.
Is there anything actually, Rosie, that you would recommend to the libraries that don't have a fundraising role? Apart from just get one.
Yeah, get one. No, it is tricky. Just to be honest, it's hard. But yeah, well, it's well worth engaging colleagues, and colleagues are already in your libraries are already engaged in this, applying for Arts Council grants, etc. So it's yeah, maybe the consultancy support is one of the ways to explore, or connecting with your local CBSs, which you already do. So yeah, keep looking at what's out there.
Yeah, I would say, you know, consultancy firms are fantastic, and we've used them from the odd occasion. I would say this, you know, and the reason why I talk about a 2-page ask, and really honing your message is that not that I would want to do myself or anyone else out of a job, but you know, if you write, and if you're a creative writer, you know, putting together an ask is really about writing creatively, telling a story and problem solving, because you're trying to get all of these pieces of information into a flow that will make people want to give you money. And if you try and look at that part of it as an enjoyable part of just writing, I think that that's half the battle. Because today, you know, what Liz is talking about, you know, I've applied, we get funding from those large organisations. They are big applications, and they can be challenging applications, and lots of them are about systems change. And I think collectively Library Connected would probably be really great at doing an application to those big trusts and foundations. In all honesty, I think it might be more challenging for a library to look for funding from Paul Hamlin Foundation, from Garfield Weston, unless it's a big strategic change within the library service. And it's why I think for people who may not have experience fundraising, I think starting local and starting small is really important, because I remember what it's like when I started out. You do a big application and you think that it's brilliant and it's for £100,000. And you get a letter back saying no, then you get the second letter back saying no, and then 50 letters later, they've all said no, and it's just so disheartening. But actually, starting smaller is so much easier. And actually, just Rosie writing, starting with local councillors, absolutely network as much as you can. The majority of successful applications come through conversation, and again, that's why I've been focusing today on local trusts and foundations, because it's much easier to get them out to visit you and to strike up a conversation on the telephone.
Russell's just asked a question about as well. Is it possible to say of all the applications we might submit, what proportion would you expect to be successful?
Oh God. Well, I've been at this for many years now, and I know how to target, and we have a team that helps us target. But I can honestly say, when I worked in the arts before I moved into the charity sector, and I would say, and I felt it was pretty good back then, even if I wasn't. I would say that I could send out 20 to 50, and I would get no's. And you know, pretty regularly, because you do fall into that trap of just sending out as many as possible, and they're kind of round robins almost. So you should be aiming for, I would say, if you're starting out, you should be aiming for 1 in 10 and trying to get that down. You know, as those successes start to come in, you should probably get that down to 1 in 4. And I'd say for For trusts and foundations, we're about 1 in 4. For trusts and foundations, we're 1 in 4. For statutory, we are pretty much 100%. And the only reason being that they are so much work that you would not want to apply unless you're pretty certain that you're in with a chance.
Yeah. I mean, my experience would echo that as well. And I think with it's that thing of kind of, in the past, we've been in a position of taking a scattergun approach to really small trusts as well. And it is that thing of just firing standard letters off to everyone, you get an out. So although it's a worthwhile strategy if you've got the time to spend or to send all those letters out, but it might end conversations sooner than it starts them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, what a really good tip is, if you are going to, if you're going to create 3 of those different asks to use as your template, in the introduction to your to any ask, you should say why you're applying to them specifically, and it's only a paragraph change out of the number of asks that you're going to do. But if a trust and foundation says in their criteria they fund libraries, you congratulate them and say, I know that you're a funder of libraries, and it's fantastic that you do that. You do this work and you support the library sector. Therefore, I'm writing to you in the hope that you will fund us. It's really important to show trustees that you've done your research on them.
Yeah. And then just picking up some of Sally's comments from Cricklewood Community Library, Esme Fairbairn's being saying no systematically. That seems they want to invite people to apply. Some of the trust approaches and the trust requirements kind of seem to shift occasionally. I remember Lankelly shifted sort of about 10 years ago to a complete invitation only, and they just shifted their strategy to something where they were going to target specific areas and have deep relationships with a few chosen people. Is that something that we're seeing to be a trend?
Yeah.
Limited amount of money in the system.
It is, especially with corporate foundations, we're seeing a growth in that. But yeah, they are, because I think because when it comes to cost cutting, lots of trusts and foundations, even though they have lots of money, they have very small teams. Yeah. And we're starting to see that more proactive approach. And we're also seeing more kind of tangible outcome driven applications, projects that they want to fund. So yeah, they do shift. Every charity changes with different administrations that come in. The Esme Fairbairn one is interesting. So I would say that Esme Fairbairn have lots of different pots that you can apply to. The success rate in Esme Fairbairn is really small. We were on our 3rd attempt before they said yes to us. And the project that we're funding is a big systems change. It's a national project. Esme Fairbairn prefer national projects.
I suppose the other thing then as well is that, because should libraries, and I know there's no answer to this as well, should libraries be looking at the cultural streams, cultural funding streams, or the social impact funding streams and the economic impact funding streams?
I think that's a really good question. And we are going through, I don't know if many people know about our Connecting Stories project, but we're going through, our Connecting Stories project is very much interlinked with the Arts Council and their strategy, and it's about the promotion of literature and books. And our big concern, my big concern is our identity and where people see us, and about that social impact. And I think it's really, I think that's a decision that a library has to make. You know, when making an application. I think it's both. I think it's absolutely both. And I think that, and there's no reason why you cannot make both asks to different funders. I think you've probably got a greater chance if you talk about the community development aspect, the importance of a library, possibly health and well-being, because that's a national conversation just now. Whether it's development of EDI, equality, equity, diversity, inclusion, as part of that, you know, growth that trend growth as well. It's really what you can make arguments for both very easily with the library, and there's no yes or no, because different funders fund different things.
Yeah.
But actually, my point was that when it comes to the culture side, just remember this: the cultural funders who would fund libraries will also fund theatres, will also fund theatre companies, dance companies, literature, writing charities. So the competition is pretty fierce in that sector, particularly with so many cultural organisations closing down over COVID and looking for so much money now leaving COVID closures.
Brilliant, thank you. Any final questions or final comments from anyone? Just to again pick up on what Sally suggested, background in proofreading and copywriting has been very helpful. Condensing information and telling the story straight away seems to help with applications, remembering that people get bored. And also that's really useful just in terms of the fact that a lot of these application forms have got word limits or character limits, which are even worse. And coming from a perspective of using 20,000 words when 5 will do, as Victoria knows very well, kind of just keeping to the point on what you're writing, and don't try and fill the word count, I suppose, as well, is probably something that's worth highlighting as well, because I always feel that I'm doing it now.
Yeah, white space. Because there's, I think perhaps maybe people may not know this, but there's 2 ways to apply. You can create your ask, which is a 2-page introduction, which hits all the criteria headings that the trust wants, and there's also the application form. We actually do a combination of both, but you must use an application form if they require an application form. But when it comes to the ask, white space is so crucial, because you can find yourself, narrowing the sides of the paper, and trying to fit in as many words as possible, and people get bored. I mean, Rose is like, people get bored.
Yeah. Brilliant. Any final questions? Final comments from anyone? I think that might be it. Do you have any final recommendations and final suggestions then, Colin? We can't leave it on people get bored. We need to.
As I said today, I would encourage you to think local. I would encourage you, especially if you're starting out, to think small. And I would absolutely think about your library users and not about your needs. Because once you put your head into library users and what they get out from your services, the actual ask is a lot easier to write.
Brilliant. And I suppose it's also similar to when we talked about Section 106 and SIL funding in a previous webinar. One of the key things was that it's about building up a bit of a pipeline as well. And again, with that, and I suspect with this, the best time to start was 3 years ago. And if you haven't, then kind of just get onto it now, and just sort of start now, because actually the responses will start coming through in 6 to 12 months, rather than it's not going to be something that starts bringing money in next month.
Well, it's another reason for starting with a small local trust, because often they meet monthly. Often they make decisions, often they're family trusts, and the people who started it still make decisions every month. Sometimes it's a grant manager. So actually, quick results, it's easier to go smaller and local than actually go national.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you, Colin, and thank you, Liz, in your absence as well. It's been great to have your expertise, and we will be putting a recording of this on the income generation group, as well as the presentations as well. And we'll pull out those links that we've just put in the chat as well, to those different resources and to 360 Giving as well. And what would be really good is if people do have successful applications and they're happy to share them on the Income Generation Network, that would be great as well, just so that people can see what works as well, and essentially kind of learn and build on everyone else's experience. Steal like an artist. Yes, absolutely. Thank you again. And we don't have our next future funding webinar lined up yet. We're looking at doing that in August, and it's going to focus on demonstrating value and evidencing impact from the perspective of central government. So we've got some of the DCMS analysts and economists coming along to talk to us about the Green Book and their method of evaluating projects. So it might be a little bit technical, but should be really valuable as well, and kind of a lot of focusing on those kind of hard outcomes that might be good for the larger bids as well. So it might link through to some of that as well. So thank you again, everyone, and we shall see you all soon.